Good afternoon. All right, I'm going to say that again. Good afternoon. All right. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the poster session, and I hope some of you met new people and had great conversation over lunch. We had a wonderful morning, and I'm looking forward to an exciting afternoon as well. We are here today because of the vision of our next speaker, Dr. Gregory Washington, president of George Mason University. President Gregory Washington is the 8th president of George Mason and leads Virginia's largest and most diverse public university into its second half century, positioning it for long-term success as a beacon of educational access for all. He launched his Mason presidency in July 2020 with a series of initiatives to create new academic and entrepreneurial pathways for all Virginians. He also opened or broke ground on academic facilities on all 3 campuses across the university's 847 acres and established the Anti-Racism and Inclusive Excellence Taskforce to ensure fairness in university practices and policies. Hundreds of people have been engaged in the ARIE work from the Mason community, including our students, our faculty, staff, alumni, and Board of Visitor members. The ARIE Research Conference is just one commitment of many. Our commitment to remain a national leader in anti-racism and inclusive excellence is intentional and is driven by work that is ongoing and transformative. Here at Mason, we are all together different, leading this vision in action for a new era. We are thrilled to have President Washington with us. After this video, you will hear from President Gregory Washington.
Call us different, because we are. We celebrate different. We are fueled by different. Different in where we come from, how we think, but the same in our dreams for tomorrow. Merging different points of view to create new ideas, different solutions, an unheard of opportunity. We are united in tackling the most pressing challenges the world has ever faced. We are driven by the pull of possibility, to think fearlessly, to inspire, to protect, and to heal the planet. To question what if, why not? You with me? These are our rallying cries. We know the world will change, because together, we will be the ones who change it. So yeah, call Mason different. Altogether different.
All right, let's welcome Dr. Washington to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Hello. First and foremost, I want to thank you for attending our first annual Anti-Racism and Inclusive Excellence Conference. And I want to welcome you on behalf of the more than 46,000 faculty, staff, and students here at George Mason University. We are just so glad you all have come together with us today. And that deserves some applause. The reality is, we didn't know how this was going to turn out. we had no idea. But it has exceeded my expectations. I was able to come out and take a look at the posters and see everything that was done there. You all have done an outstanding job. You know, I have an old saying. It goes, you know, you see a frog at the top of a flagpole, you know he didn't get there by himself. right? And so while people will try to credit this success to me, the reality is that there are a whole bunch of people who made this happen. And two of the most important, one of them we just heard from, Dr. Sharnia Artis. Please give her a round of applause. And the other one is our Vice President for Research and Innovation, Professor Andre Marshall. Please give him a round of applause as well. You know, and I just get to, you know, come up here and catch the baby. You know, being a president is a lot like teaching at a graveyard. You got lots of people under you, but you always believe that nobody's listening. Somebody got that. I feel you. So why are we involved in this anti-racism and inclusive excellence conference? I mean, why Mason? And what is our vision for it? Well, let me pose it a different way. How is Mason not the place to examine these issues? Look, if the largest and most diverse institution in a state that produced 7 of the first 12 presidents isn't willing to confront these challenges, who will? If an R1 public research university with a campus less than 7 miles from the U.S. Capitol isn't willing to confront these challenges, who will? If a public university that graduates students at about the same rate, regardless of ethnicity or background, isn't willing to confront these issues, who will? If a public university with no racial or ethnic group comprising more than 40% of its student body isn't willing to confront these issues, who will? And if a public university with a 5-star rating from the Campus Pride Index, a green light designation from the Foundation of Individual Rights in Education, and a #1 rating for veterans from College Factual isn't willing to confront these challenges, who will? The fact of the matter is that this university has a history of confronting and dealing with these issues, especially lately. You know, I was here when we dedicated the enslaved people of George Mason Memorial on our campus, and that is really the genesis of this, because that came out of undergraduate student research who looked into the history of the individuals who were part of those who were enslaved by George Mason, looked at their contributions, looked at their outcomes, looked at their lives, and categorized that for us to be able, to memorialize and to advance this very day. One of the people involved in that project, I know I saw her here earlier, Dr. Wendy Manuel Scott, shows you the connection that faculty can have to students. Dr. Scott is in the back. Please give Dr. Scott a round of applause. We established the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, one of the first of its kind in the country. And I believe you all probably heard a little bit about that this morning. So where do we want to take this and where do we want to go with this? The reality is we want to deal with issues of diversity and inclusive excellence from the perspective of research, because that's what R1s do. We want to have faculty from all over the world, we got many of them from outside of Mason here today, to converge here to discuss these issues. You went out and you saw all the posters that lined the hallways, and those posters were dealing with some really, really deep and heavy issues. Why is it that why would we want to do that? There is a generation coming behind us. 68 million people, as Dr. Cynthia just highlighted to me. 68 million of the most diverse group of individuals that this country has ever had, 68 million of them, and that next generation are being brought up, they're going to inherit this country. And they're going to have to know how to engage and deal with an environment that is diverse, right? And so we are doing this in part for them. But also we want to move knowledge forward. We want to discuss those issues that many of us didn't learn in our history books, that many of us didn't talk about, right? We need to discuss the greatness of Egypt and how the Egypt of antiquity was actually uniquely African. It may not look like that today, but research tells us so. We want to understand, look, I'm an engineer, and we need to understand the marvels of the Great Pyramid from a scientific perspective. How do you get 2,500,000 stone blocks, some weighing between 2 and 30 tons? How do you move that across desert sand? We would struggle to do that to this day. How were they able to do it more than 3,000 years ago? You know, we also understand that there was a relationship between the indigenous people in America and those in Africa. The reality is the only place in the world where pyramids exist is in Central and South America and in Egypt. So we knew a connection existed. It's research that made those connections. The research of Ivan van Sertima and others teaches us that a number of African countries produce boats, large ones, some of them capable of carrying elephants. And they crossed hundreds of years before Christopher Columbus. The indigenous people actually told this to Columbus. He wrote it down in his log. You don't get that knowledge unless you do the research and read the logs. But it's not just about antiquity. Look, by 1913 in this country alone, there are more than 1,000 patents issued to black and indigenous people in the U.S. And it goes on from there. I could talk to you about Garrett Morgan and the stoplight and the gas mask. I could talk to you about Mark Dean and the fact that he held 3 of the 9 original patents for the PC. I could talk to you about Mario Molina, who, without Molina's contribution, we literally would not be here today. He was a major part of the research team who won the Nobel Prize, who actually discovered the cause for the hole in our ozone layer. And it was that work in which we were able to close that ozone layer so that we can all survive to this day. Look, we need a place to be able to discuss these contributions and engage and debate them. That doesn't really exist in our country. And what better place to have it than here? We need to understand how illicit trafficking of humans through our southern borders is affecting populations in the U.S. and in Mexico, right? We need to understand those things that are not readily taught in everyday classes. Look, if we are to become a national exemplar, we must also be willing to confront our own past, present, and future, and root out legacies of bias in our own policies and our own practices. Look, we got to be able to ask the hard questions, a number of which you saw out in the foyer here. And that's part of the overwhelming response to this initiative. And to be honest with you, we actually have the horses here to do it, right? We got people like Professor Guadalupe Carrera Cabrera, who's an expert on U.S.-Mexico relations and really looks at and examines border trafficking and migration. We got individuals like Charles Chavis, whose work focuses on the histories of racial violence and the civil rights activism in black and Jewish relations in the American South. And if you're looking at what's happening in modern crime, we got people here like Cynthia Lum, who was a former Baltimore police officer. You see that movie, The Wire? That was her beat. Who became a faculty member and now teaches on evidence-based policing. We have a whole host of those individuals here, and we are here to produce outcomes. We're here to promote research, and we're here to grow the body of knowledge and to grow that body of knowledge throughout the world. And so I want to thank you all for coming. We don't know where this is going. Again, I told you we didn't know how this was going to turn out. But from the likes of things, it's going well, and I look forward to working with all of you as we continue to expand and contribute in the future. So thank you all. Look forward to a great program.
Thank you, Dr. Washington, for those remarks and sharing Mason's journey. Now I would like to welcome up our other esteemed guests for the presidential panel. Our first guest, Dr. Ann Kress. I would like to welcome her to the stage. Dr. Ann Kress is the 6th president of Northern Virginia Community College, a role she began in January 2020 after a career of almost 3 decades in higher education that includes serving as a tenured faculty member in English and in numerous academic administrative roles at community colleges in Florida and New York. NOVA serves almost 80,000 students from across 6 campuses, and Dr. Kress focuses on fulfilling the college's promise that every student succeeds, every program achieves, and every community prospers. I would like to welcome up our second president, Dr. Makola Abdullah, to the stage. On February 1st, 2016, Dr. Makola Abdullah became the 14th president of Virginia State University. Under President Abdullah's leadership, Virginia State University has experienced extensive achievements and success, including implementation of a new 2025 strategic plan, Permanence with Purpose to chart the university's path to continued growth and excellence, a $30 million gift to Virginia State University from philanthropist Mackenzie Scott, the most significant single donor gift in the university's history. They have increased 4-year graduation rate to the highest 4-year graduation rate record recorded in the history of Virginia State University. So we're so excited to have all of them here. This is just a short list of their accomplishments that I've shared. If you want to learn more about them, you can see their full bio on the Hoover app. All right. So let's get the conversation started. All right. So we have 3 presidents here. We're talking about anti-racism and inclusive excellence. I think this is a true model for inclusive excellence, where we have a president representing a 4-year institution, a large Research One university, President Washington, and then we also have President Kress from a 2-year institution and one of the largest here in the Commonwealth. And then we also have a president, President Abdullah from Virginia State University, a minority serving institution, in particular a HBCU, historically black college university. And so I'm excited to hear about the different perspectives from our 3 presidents today, and I want to thank you all again for being with us. So Dr. Washington talked about some of the successes here at Mason, and so I'm gonna give this first question to either President Kress or President Abdullah. Over the last 2 years, we have seen a more galvanized effort towards anti-racism in many organizations. Many organizations have reaffirmed their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They have doubled down. And so I wanted to ask about, what is one of your successes from your institutions that you had advancing anti-racism on your campus?
Okay, I'll go first. One, it's exciting to be here. Thank you all for clapping. That was so kind. I also want to thank Greg Washington. We've known each other for now going on 30 years, which is really, really interesting. We're both engineers. We're young faculty years ago. And so it's good to see him working and in his environment. I just wanted to tell you I'm so proud of you.
Oh, that's good.
And it's also good also here being with the big dog of Virginia higher education. NOVA is the biggest college in the Commonwealth that provides the most access, the most opportunity here in the Commonwealth, and so always a pleasure to be with you too. No. Okay, now so for me, Virginia State University is a unique institution. Being an HBCU, we were founded on principles of anti-racism and inclusion going back to 1882. I like to say that VSU was kind of the answer to the first question of, do Black Lives Matter? At a time when the Commonwealth was negotiating a new public school system, black teachers got together to work with the Readjuster Party at the time. And again, the history in the 1880s is very interesting. To form a university, Virginia State University, which when it was founded in 1882, was one of the few HBCUs that offered collegiate degrees. Most offered normal degrees just to train teachers, not Virginia State. And we hired the dean of the law school at Howard University, John Mercer Langston, to be our first president. And so we have been in this business, if you will, for over 140 years. And uniquely enough, because the separation of sexes also wasn't a question for African Americans, the first woman to graduate with a collegiate degree in the Commonwealth of Virginia was Lula Mae Johnson, who graduated from Virginia State University. And so when you start talking about diversity and inclusion, whether it's educating low-income students or gender representation in STEM, Virginia State University has been an incubator solving Virginia's problems before Virginia knew it had a problem. Right? And so we've always been on that cutting edge. And so we've got a lot of successes in that area. And in some ways, the question in that way is almost too easy. And so I really want to concentrate on the inclusive part, because we can all do better as it relates to inclusiveness. And at Virginia State University, one of the things that we're trying to do is really move forward in providing inclusivity for LGBTQ plus students, and also to let white, Asian, and Hispanic students know that Virginia State University is an incredible value in higher education, particularly those students who are local to our area. There are many students who look past Virginia State University because we're a historically black college, and we're proud of that, by the way, very, very proud, and students are proud of that. But we want to make sure that all students in our area recognize that they can get an incredible value in higher education at VSU. And so in two ways. One, we started our VCAN program that has increased the number of diverse students in and around our area in Central Virginia. And second, we've hired our first Chief Diversity Officer, a trans man who is a 3-time graduate of Virginia State University, to make sure that we move our inclusive initiatives forward. So I wanted to answer that way.
All right, thank you.
Awesome.
President Chris.
Sure. So first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here, and I think everyone knows the strength of the partnership between Mason and Nova is without equal. Our apologies.
No, sir.
But about 3,500 students a year will transfer from Nova to Mason, a growing number of them as part of the advanced program. And certainly we have very strong articulation agreements at Nova across the Commonwealth, including with VSU and NSU. And we recognize that for many of our students, going to a public HBCU is something that really fits their vision of what higher education should be, as well as, quite frankly, the affordability that you both offer to our students. So let me talk a little bit about Nova and then get to some of the things, and I'm going to go a little bit in a wonkier direction as well. But when you look at Northern Virginia community colleges across the country reflect the communities that they serve. This is an incredibly diverse community, and so our demographics are very similar to Mason's. When you look at Nova, there is, much as at Mason, no majority population. Right? We reflect the diversity, the growing diversity of Northern Virginia, and I'm sure you have looked at the trend lines. If you went back 20 years, this region did not look the way it looks today, and I would say we're the better for it. Right? When you look at the strength and the power of diversity and what that brings to a region, you can see the success of Northern Virginia rise. The more it starts to reflect, I would say, the America that we all see in front of us. So when you look at NOVA, one of the things we also know, though, is that a large majority of the students who start at NOVA start there because of our affordability, right? We're less than half the cost of starting at Mason. We're about half the cost of starting at VSU. And so our students also reflect a different kind of diversity, which is economic diversity, which is an incredible challenge in this region. Just to give you a sense, to qualify for G3, the Workforce Promise Scholarship that the state offers, students can be at 400% of poverty and still qualify. Why is that? Because it takes more than 400% level of poverty to live in Northern Virginia. So we're very cognizant of that. When you look at NOVA, we've also hired our first Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer 2 years ago, and I'm very proud to say that the Association of Community College Trustees has named Northern Virginia Community College as the Southern Region Award winner for diversity in education. We also were honored by the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education. So why did they do that? It's because we took a real systematic way of approaching diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we have a strategic plan that's based in inclusive excellence. So I want to highlight 2 outcomes of that. One is the wonky part, right? And so statements are great, special initiatives are great, but anyone who's done this work for long enough knows that it's policy that makes the difference. When you get something written into law, into the policy of an institution, that this is the way we do things. Doesn't matter if Greg is the president, Ann is the president, Nicole is the president. When we're gone, someone else has to carry this out because it's written into the structure of what we do. So we've embedded search advocates now into every one of our searches. Somebody who makes sure that that search is running equitably, that the search committee is grounded in what the position is asking for, not in what they themselves see when they look in the mirror or when potentially they look out into their department and see a department that might have been hired 20, 30 years ago who looks very much like they do. And they're very comfortable with those folks. So what we've really tried to do is to shake that process up because we want the individuals who stand at the front of the classroom, who serve in administrative offices, who serve as advisors, to also reflect the students that they're serving. Representation matters. I say that as somebody whose first degree is from what was not then the Warrington College of Business, what is now the Warrington College of Business at the University of Florida. I had 1 female faculty member the entire time I was in the College of Business. And if you think that doesn't send a message to myself and all of the other young women who were in my business classes, you probably shouldn't be at this conference, right? So representation matters. The other thing I'll just throw out there is much like Mason, because we've really been focused on equity and outcomes, we can proudly say that when our students walked across the stage at Eagle Bank Arena in May, they walked across the stage in the proportion that they're represented in our student population. So we did not see equity gaps there. But where is the work still to be done in terms of inclusive excellence? They weren't always in the programs that pay, right? The students of color weren't always in engineering. They didn't necessarily see that that was their future. So there's so much more that we can do, but we're very proud of where we are today.
Thank you. President Washington, would you like to share success here at Mason? I'll take that.
Very well.
Oh, very kind of you.
Well, look, the reality is that we've had a number of them, and I'll piggyback a little bit on what Ann said. We are changing policy and infrastructure here, and ultimately, that is what matters. You know, if I asked most of you in this room to talk about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you all know the right answers to the question. Everybody knows the right thing to say, right? But we don't have the same performance. And the reason we don't have the same performance is because real, true performance comes in actually changing the structures, right? Changing the frameworks of an organization and making that organization from one that didn't produce into one that does. And that's really, really difficult and hard work. right? And so we began early on in earnest changing the structure of the campus, right? The first thing you have to recognize is that if you're going to be an inclusive, diverse and inclusive place, you got to start looking at your leadership team. You got to hire diverse and inclusive leaders. I mean, that's kind of where it starts. And we brought Sharnia on board to help us do that. We've had remarkable success in the hiring of diverse faculty across a number of units. And I'm saying we've hired diverse faculty in units that it is really hard to hire diverse faculty in, right? We hired 5 Latino faculty in the College of Sciences. Unheard of. It's a really, really hard thing to do, right? We've hired more than 19 African American faculty in the last couple of years since we've been here. And so we are expanding those numbers dramatically, right? We hired our first vice president for research who was a person of color, and Andre Marshall. And so we are making those impacts at the structural level, and that it's not a lot of work it's not shiny and flashy, because sometimes it's a piece of paper and sometimes it's a new policy. And you're like, here's what we done, right? And the students look at you and like, well, I don't feel that here, right? But what will happen over time is that you actually will feel that, because those structures impact the policies in which we do. So that is kind of where you are. And I feel sorry for you. You had that one person in your in your program as you were going through school, but you were in Florida.
I was in Florida.
And that's a problem.
That was probably, I was going to say, that was probably the least of my worries.
Each of you have spoke about systemic change at your institutions, but also the difficulty of doing the work. And so I want to shift and ask about, what are some of the most pressing issues that colleges and university campuses are facing when it comes to advancing anti-racism and inclusive excellence? And how are you addressing these challenges?
Well, since I punted last time, I'll
You
start.
did, yes.
I'll start. I think I want to go back to something that Greg said. If you ask folks, they can give you the right answer, right? Much of this, especially over the last few years, was really driven from the top, right? There's a statement that comes out. There's a plan that's put in place. And so I think you might also be part of the truth and racial healing and transformation dialogues. I think there was something we skipped over, right? And it's getting people to have real conversations with others that are grounded in the difficult work it takes to move forward in meaningful ways, not in surface ways. Right? Everyone can say the right things inside this room and go outside and still engage without maybe even thinking about it, in microaggressions, in offhand comments that land with a weight they can never imagine. So I think part of the challenge now is moving from this level back down to the ground level, which is where the real work happens. I always tell people, did you know the president of your institution when you graduated? No one does, right?
Exactly right.
I once had somebody said, this place has a president? I was like, oh, we're in trouble. But you know the faculty, you know an advisor, you know a colleague, you know a mentor. And I think that's where the rubber hits the road. It's where the real work needs to happen, but it is the longest march that's going to happen in terms of the work. And so it is about that persistence and that resilience and that grit to get it done.
Persistence and resilience, that's been a common theme for today.
Right. Well, look, I'll tell you this. There are a host of challenges facing us, and they're real. We are in the midst of what is called an enrollment cliff. We're already starting to see it. The enrollment cliff really starts in 2024. You'll start to see a reduction in the total number of students who are actually pursuing degrees because there are fewer individuals that are coming out of high school. and that cliff is nationwide. And between 2024 and 2032, 2033, the decline is pretty much straight down. And so you're going to see a dramatic shrinking of the pie. But even before that, students are openly questioning whether they should go to a university, right? They're openly questioning the value of a degree. And we lost 1 million students since the pandemic as a country. There are 1 million fewer students at universities now than what they were before the pandemic, right before the pandemic hit. And people say, well, that was because of the pandemic. Well, what they don't tell you is that over the last 10 years, we lost 4 million students. And it was concentrated under the pandemic. We lost more in a shorter period of time. But over the last 10 years, universities have been losing students. And you're actually seeing the net effect of that on universities in Virginia, right? A number of them are having massive challenges with maintaining enrollments, okay? And so all of these issues are challenges that affect diverse populations, because where do you think we're seeing the biggest drops in students? Are in those diverse populations. There's a study recently that highlighted that 38% of students who are college eligible, these are students who have 1,300 SAT equivalents or higher, 38% of them are not choosing a 4-year institution. And a significant number of them are not choosing a 2-year institution, right? And so that's a big number of people that we're missing, and they tend to largely focus in those communities. There are mental health challenges that we are dealing with, right? The mental health strife is real. And you know, this is one of the reasons why it's great to have this conference, right? There are generational traumas that are affecting our communities, and those generational traumas are real. We actually have to have research and studies to get into those traumas to help us understand what they are, how do we combat them, and how do we engage these youth to help them be successful going forward. I can go on and on. You know, I know a lot about what the challenges are. I just don't have all the solutions.
All right, cool. I get to go last. One, I think that every kid's not supposed to go to college. And I think 2-year institutions and 4-year institutions do a great job at what they do. I also think that some kids can go pro without ever going to a 2-year or a 4-year institution, and that's fine too. However, the narrative about the value in higher education and whether one needs a 2-year or a 4-year degree is mostly peddled by people who have 4-year degrees. Not only is it peddled by people who have 4-year degrees, it's peddled by people who are sending their kids to get 4-year degrees. And so the whole narrative around that there's other choices that you can make, are falling disproportionately on black and brown kids. And I am angry about that, including, but not limited to, the idea that students shouldn't take out loans. Look, I'm not for more loans for kids, but I also understand that there's a group of people in our society that can't go to college if they don't get them. And so if we continue to tell people that you should go to college debt-free and you can't afford to go to college, then you don't go to college. But you can still take out a loan for a car, $199, no money down. But don't take out any money for your school. There are so many narratives that are being taught right now that are disproportionately hitting minority kids and telling them that they shouldn't go to college at all. So that's number one. Number two, the amount of barriers that we've set up for young people to go to college is incredible. You got to fill out a FAFSA, you got to fill out an application. The amount that it costs, most people don't have $20,000, $30,000. It doesn't make any sense. Everything that we have to apply to college, to get into the right one, you got to take the right classes in the right high schools and get the right test scores. All of which are all based in racism. All of them. You can clap for that. So one, we're discouraging kids from going. Two, we put up all of these barriers so people don't go. And then the last but certainly not least is money. It's money. Our enrollment went up this year. Our enrollment went up last year. Why? Because we got more money for financial aid. It ain't a secret. It really isn't. We are among the most affordable four-year institutions in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and yet our young people can't afford to come. If I had more money, I can keep more kids in school. My kids drop out of school. My graduation rates are lower, not because my kids are dumber or not as motivated. It's because in the second year, they don't have the money they had in the first year. So anyway, off soapbox. There are a lot of institutional challenges that we've got to fix and work on together. It's not just what we do in the classroom. It's not about saying the right things. None of the things that I've said are about saying the right things. We've all got to vote for the right people. We've got to be really critical about moving policy forward. And we have to believe that higher education should be for everybody who is motivated and wants it. We got to believe that.
And if I could
Absolutely.
just quickly climb on your soapbox.
Please. I'm
Go
over
for it.
to you.
Get off.
So
for it.
I just want to highlight something about the three institutions you see represented on this stage. And you may know this, you may not, but we are funded at very different levels than other institutions in this state.
Other more expensive institutions.
Other more expensive institutions, other institutions that are not as diverse as the institutions that you see on the stage. And I can't speak for either of the other presidents, but I can tell you that community colleges in the state give 57 cents on the dollar compared to what a university gets. And there are some reasons for that, to be sure. We do not have a research function, but we also serve the students with the greatest need. Before the pandemic, we ran a survey on basic needs and security with NOVA students. What we found was that 15% of our students were homeless. 40% of them suffered with food insecurity. They were more likely to fall into both of those categories if they were students of color, if they were parenting students, right? So, when you talk about the structure and how that does sometimes reinforce the stories of the past, part of that is also the budget.
All right, so I know we're not going to get to many solutions in the time that we have, but I'll still ask this question. So there's a funding disparity. What steps are you all taking to address that funding disparity?
She went first last time. It's your turn.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
You're welcome. Just because you're at home.
Actually,
doesn't
no.
mean-
Actually, I went first time. Then she went first.
No.
It's
Who
your
wants
turn.
to go?
I'll go.
Just messing with you.
For me, everything is based around the students and trying to get additional resources for them. And so I, like my colleagues, I will go anywhere and talk to anybody if it's about getting resources for my students. And that, for me, I think that there are 5 partners in educating young people. So it's the students and their families. It's Virginia State University, the university itself, state and local government, the federal government, since they are the Pell and many of our loan programs, and last but not least, private philanthropy. And so the other 3, I chase down, and I'm always asking them, do you believe that young people deserve the right to higher education? If you do, then I want to partner with you. If you don't, thank you very much, so I can go talk to somebody else.
All right.
Well, look, there is absolutely nothing I can add to that. From that perspective, from a perspective of resources, there is a funding disparity here, and I'm going to flip this question in a different way to many of you in the room. The reality is that I can go knock on a member of any of those. We're going to cut out the private donors right now. Just talk about
Public.
the governments, the state government, the federal government alike. I can go knock on their doors and talk to them about resources and talk to them about the underfunded nature of students here at Mason, and we can make a great case about it. The reality is, under the last 5 presidents, we've seen that situation not change that much. In fact, it's gotten worse. The institutions that have gotten the most amount of money tend to get more, and the institutions that have gotten the least amount of money tend to get less, right? But maybe we're looking at this the wrong way. It's, because I can walk out of the office of any of our elected officials, and as soon as I walk down the hallway, there are 4 or 5 more presidents lined up to go in the same room and make their cases. And so one of us are just canceling out the other. But you know who can't be canceled out? That is all of the individuals in this room. You all have something to say about the education of the students in this state. You all can actually engage. A, you vote. That is incredibly important. But B, our elected officials will actually listen to you, and if you engage, right? And so don't disregard the actual power that you have. You actually have the power to engage. You got the power to knock on doors, and you can and you will get an answer. We have to start looking at this problem differently.
And can I jump on his soapbox before you start?
Absolutely.
I think one of the great challenges in the academy is, particularly among faculty, is that there's a level of, for lack of a better term, I can't think of a better word, false humility that we have in the academy that says that we shouldn't brag about the work that we do. And so no one ever aspires to be dean or president. Everybody's like, oh, if it happens, but, I'm just going to stay in my little cubbyhole. I believe that that's part of what's hurting higher education, is that our voices, and when I say our, I mean our voices, they aren't loud enough at the table. The people who need to understand how great George Mason is doing, you all see them every day. If everybody in this room was saying some of the great things that are happening in your own departments, I'm not talking about Greg's talking points, but your own talking points about what your students are doing and the great work you're doing in the research labs, if those conversations were happening more in the coffee shops and more in Whole Foods, I'm assuming a lot of people here go to Whole Foods. But they happen more in the coffee shops and more in Whole Foods, there would be more people who really understood and appreciated the great work that happens in higher education. And the idea that our critics can so easily talk us down is because we're not using the base, our entire power to say the message of what's happening in higher education. And so I think what Greg said is powerful, is how do we all, and again, they can be different stories. They don't have to be the same story, but just you all are doing some incredible work here, amongst the best work in the country. It should be obvious when he goes to Richmond that everybody goes, we should fund that work more.
Yeah. And this is an Aldi.
More of an Aldi's? More of an Aldi's. Just
Lido.
I'm with Aldi.
Lido here.
way to defend your people. I like that. That's the way to go.
So I would just build on both of that by saying that, when you go into those offices, when you call folks, when you write letters, help individuals understand the total cost of getting a student across the stage at commencement. What does that success take? I was at last year's commencement, I was thinking someone in universities needs to develop one of those augmented realities where you could hold up a phone around a student and see every single office that student has touched. We serve students who are first-generation college students. We also serve students who are first-generation high school graduates. They don't know anyone who's even graduated high school before. Right. So how are they going to imagine what the future of work looks like? Because everyone that they know in their family has never even made it out of high school to imagine what a career would be. So I think one of the things we are not very good at, and we're getting better at it, is helping folks to understand what are the real resources that students need to succeed today, especially if they're coming from underrepresented communities, especially if they're coming from low-income communities, especially if they're parenting students. For example, we, like every institution, have a food pantry. We call them Nighthawk nests. And we've long provided food to our students, but then we started to realize all of those foods weren't culturally responsive. So we started to partner with the Capital Area Food Bank. And the Capital Area Food Bank now provides us food for our pantries through a grant. But we also recognize that sometimes the students who need those foods the most are also suffering from time poverty. Right? They can't find the time to get to the campus to take the public transportation to do all that. So now we're partnering on home delivery. of those foods, right? So it's thinking about the total package. So full credit to the Capital Area Food Bank, full disclosure, sit on the board of the Capital Area Food Bank. But, it's really thinking about what does it mean to be a client, right? What services do you need? When I went to college, I can't speak for the two gentlemen on either side of me, no one talked about mental health. Right? No one. We had an infirmary that was in a building that looked like it was built during the Middle Ages. Again, Florida, I get it, but no one talked about these things. And now, not only do we talk about them, but we act on those needs. That takes money. It takes resources to advise, to coach, to help students succeed. Why is Advance so successful? There are 3 different types of coaches who work with advanced students because they are very likely to be first generation, Pell eligible, students who would not otherwise imagine themselves as engineers or going into biomedicine, right? This is what we're talking about, but too often, the folks who fund us, regardless of it the federal or the state or sometimes even philanthropy, they're thinking about tuition, which just isn't enough.
I would be remiss if I didn't also highlight the power you have in touching our youth. The reality is one word from an individual in this room to a student in terms of engaging that student in some area of research that the student wants to work on, or just being there to help that person go from point A to point B. Just one amount, just a small amount of your time per week will have a tremendous effect on the outcome of those students. I look back at my own life, at the times, at the successes that I've had. It's been jagged. And at times when I was down, there was always somebody there to pick me up.
You're welcome, Greg.
True that.
That was 30 years ago, right?
Yeah, 30 years ago. He's still talking about it to this day.
I was waiting.
But the reality is that you actually do have something to say about this. You all do. We have left this generation with some tremendous challenges. And I say we in the collective is because we've created the challenges for them. We have put them in a very, very difficult solution. And the reality is if they don't succeed, we're going to have a little challenge in our older age. Okay? And so this what I'm speaking about is not totally altruistic. It's also about our future survival too. So please engage as many youth as you can, engage as many of our students in these programs, and just guide them. Be there for them. Sometimes just be there just to listen. You'll be surprised the outcomes that we will actually achieve.
No, that was great. You all answered my next question, which was really about, what can this audience do? What can members of the college and university community do who aren't in leadership positions to support your vision? And so I'm going to recap some of the things that I heard, and if you all want to add to it, please feel free. There's power in engaging. So be engaged, get out and vote, connect with your local and state legislators. There's also power in the collective impact. Based off of the conversations you all have been talking about partnerships, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and that's an important piece. In mentoring, connecting, even if it's spending a few minutes mentoring the next generation, because they're going to have some grand challenges to solve for us. Anything that you want to add for our community, those that are in leadership positions, what can they do to support your vision in action for a new era when it comes to having an anti-racist and inclusive environment?
I think that because the conversations, the real conversations that are happening about anti-racism and inclusivity are happening with you in rooms that are not like this. I think in having those conversations, some with friends, some with people who are still learning, is to make sure you tie it back to the greatness of, in my case, of what Virginia State University does. VSU is responsible for changing the world through higher education. The whole reason why we want to invest in anti-racism and inclusive policies is so our students are better. I mean, that's it. If we can graduate better engineers, better businessmen, better social workers, we're going to do a great job. How do we do that? If we create an environment where our students are comfortable, they feel a part of it, they'll study more. And if we can do it in an environment where faculty and staff feel more comfortable, they'll teach better. And so it's simple. It isn't that grand. It's actually very straightforward. You want to produce better graduates. And the best way to produce better graduates is to have an inclusive environment for your faculty, staff, and students.
I would just add to that, bringing the community college perspective to this, that we often say that our students view every molehill as a mountain. And there are often students, especially students who are Black, who are brown, who are Asian, who are LGBTQ, where every door has been closed to them.
Right.
And I would encourage you to be overly welcome.
Indeed.
Overly welcoming. In a community college that I started at, we ran a student satisfaction inventory. And we kept getting this answer from students that they never saw advisors because the door was locked, which is against fire code. So we couldn't figure it out. And so I actually got up, I was running sort of the response team to this. I got up and I walked over to the advising office and I grabbed the door with my right hand, and that door was locked. I grabbed the other door and it was open. And I thought, if I've ever lived a metaphor for how our students see the world, I've just done it, right? That too often for our students, when they hear maybe, they hear a gigantic no with an exclamation point. When they hear a no, they don't realize they can ask somebody else and get a yes, right? So I would just encourage all of us to consider that, we're sitting up here, we've all gotten a lot of no's in our lives, and we figured out that you don't take a no from someone who can't give you a yes, right? Sometimes you don't take a no ever, even from people who can't give you yeses. But not everybody's at that point in their journey. And I think it's a responsibility we all have to be as welcoming, as inclusive, almost intrusively inclusive as we can. When you see that person sitting by themselves, realize you might be looking at a student who right at that point is thinking, should I leave or should I go? Should I stay? Should I try? Should I just get out of here? No one really wants me anyway. It's very clear that the universe is sending me a message that I've only told myself 1,000,000 times, which is that I don't belong here, right? Help folks realize they belong here.
All right. I think I want to wrap us up on that, being overly welcome. And I want to open it up for questions from our audience. We have 2 microphones on the right and then on the left, but we also have our virtual attendees on the Hoover app. So for our virtual audience, if you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat and someone from our in-person audience will ask the panelists questions for you. All right, so I'm going to start thinking about equity. I felt like I started on the right side last time, so I'm going to go over here. And you're more than welcome to ask your question.
Hi, I am a teacher for Loudoun County, so mine has to do with institutions connecting and making connections with the public school system. So I'm just wondering about how are your institutions supporting the fight of public schools against policy that is going against or fighting against anti-racism and education in classrooms. I'll tell a personal story about how recently with my team I had to talk about what book we wanted to bring to the classroom, and it got to a frustrating point where we had to give up on teaching STAMP, teaching Just Mercy, teaching The Other West More, because of the nervousness that we had of what parents were going to say, of just the political atmosphere regarding anti-racism. And I spoke with colleagues here today about having to code language in order to teach anti-racism. So I'm just curious about what your institutions are doing to support the fight that teachers and students are doing of trying to have access to anti-racism education.
We don't have a
And
code.
our
See,
esteemed panelists.
there he is helping me again.
That's right.
No, look, let me first and foremost tell you, you're not the only entity dealing with this issue. We are dealing with the same issue on our campus. And you know what time of the year it is. I will tell you how we're managing it. Because oftentimes, as faculty, you don't see it. Even our students don't see it, because the comments and the statements and the threats and all come actually directly to me. And my philosophy has always been, you do the right thing. At some point in time, you have to ask yourself, is what I'm doing right? And am I willing to endure what I have to endure in order to move in that direction? And that's been what has propelled us forward. The reality of the situation is that there will be, for lack of a better way of saying this, there will be casualties in this outcome. There will be people who will be made example of. I may actually be one of them. But that still won't deter us from doing the right thing. We have to teach the country's history, and we have to teach the country's history as it actually has occurred, right? And that's so important of us as educators to do. We just mentioned that we're ushering in the most diverse cohort of Americans the country has ever seen, right? They need to be prepared to deal with one another. And they can't do that if we don't teach history and teach it properly. And so you actually have supporters here, and we have faculty here, we have staff. And so part of the way we can help you is that you engage with us and we connect you to the right resources here to help you pose your discussions, to help you have your engagements in a way that could pass muster. And so count us in as a partner. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you for your question, and thank you for being here. It's great to have you here. On the other mic.
So I have the luxury of getting a master's in higher education administration. So it allows me to have a holistic view of higher education. And talking about the history of higher education, I've found in my position that a lot of people in higher ed aren't aware of the history of higher education. For example, how the GI Bill created more segregation in higher education, and how HBCUs were JUCOs because the Jim Crow law still happened. So what are you doing to ensure that there is a collective understanding of the history of American higher education so that your entire faculty and staff can move forward and learn from the history to make a better future?
Well, I'll start because community colleges largely grew up because of the GI Bill. We are called America's colleges, right, democracy's colleges, because quite honestly, a lot of folks who came back with benefits from the GI Bill were not going to be accepted at the existing universities, right? So that's part of who we are as community colleges. We were created with an open door because there were lots of students that every other institution did not want to see at their door. So we live it, we breathe it, it is who we are. To this day, we serve the highest percentage of students of color, of low-income students, right? Of students where, again, the world has looked at them frequently and said, you know, you're not really college material. Right? It's the reason why many folks still refer to community colleges as the 13th grade, right? Well, there was an entire sitcom created to make fun of us. But it is, I think, part of our legacy, but part of our honor that we do open that door to higher education for the full diversity of our community. You know, I always say we accept 100% of all of our qualified students, which is 100% of the students who apply. You have a GED, you don't have a GED, we can find a pathway for you. But I think it's important to understand why community colleges were created. And it's because there were lots of institutions that did, and to this day, say, no.
I'd love to do a little bit of that if I could. HBCUs, particularly Virginia State University, the history of VSU really mirrors the history of Virginia. And with African Americans getting the right to vote after Reconstruction, was part of the political movement and the ability of coalitions to come together, black and white, to move education forward in the Commonwealth. As I mentioned to you, Virginia State University was not founded as a junior college, but yet founded as a four-year institution that offered the classics and graduated students with a normal degree, but they could also graduate with a collegiate degree. That was, our first graduate was in 1884. The Constitution of Virginia changed, I believe, 1902, 1903, where African Americans were disenfranchised from the vote at that point. Simultaneously at that time, the collegiate part of Virginia State University was taken away. Didn't come back until the 1930s. We are behind University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, VMI. We're the fourth oldest public institution in the Commonwealth of Virginia. William and Mary was private when we became an institution, public institution in Virginia. If you come to my campus and look at the campus, you would be shocked to see what's not on our campus, considering the fact that we're older than almost every other institution you know in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So history is important. But our history of higher education mirrors the history of our Commonwealth, mirrors the history of our nation. It is no different. It is the same.
Now, I want to echo what both have said, but let me tell you one thing about history. History teaches us about the past so that we don't repeat it. Mm-hmm. History does not have to define us.
Indeed.
Okay, and so I guess I'll put it in the words of that brilliant poet, Eazy-E. It's not where you're from, it's where you at, right? And the reality is that there are no rules that state that you can't achieve because of your start point. This institution started as a commuter school. And I often hear that when I'm speaking, especially with a number of our older elected officials who've been in the assembly for 20, 30, 40 years. You know, you're sitting and you're talking with them and they talk about that history, and some of them still see us that way. But the reality is this institution changed its trajectory. And the higher ed has changed its trajectory. Right? And so the higher ed at its founding for many of these institutions and the higher ed today is very different. Right, we routinely partner with the folk at Virginia State and partner with Howard. We have partnerships with Hampton University, right? And those are partnerships of institutions who all bring something to the table in terms of helping us achieve an outcome in a stated goal. It's not just for them to supply us with students. It's really to advance an initiative and advance a directive. So history doesn't have to define, even though it defines our past, the history does not have to define our future.
There's Rakim.
Yeah, that's true.
There's Rakim.
What? Where you from is where you at.
Yeah.
It was Rakim?
Rakim, yeah.
All right, Rakim.
God MC.
He continues to help me to this day.
All right, we'll take a question from over here.
Sure. Hello. So we've spent a lot of time today talking about faculty, admin faculty, and students, which are all obviously very important parts of the university community, and have not spent as much time, at least explicitly, talking about classified staff, which are a hugely underrepresented group in these conversations. So I'm curious, from your perspective, when we're thinking about these inclusive excellence initiatives, do you have any in mind and or currently in the works and or have a vision for some of these policies that will be directly impacting classified staff? Because that's also a group that, I mean, let's be real, desperately needs some DEI work in our lives. So yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, we all have classified staff, and the reality for us is that there are a host of issues, even in my opinion, that are, from a classified staff perspective, even greater issues than the DEI work that we have to resolve. Being here in Northern Virginia, the salary basis for our classified staff is just something that has to be fixed. Mm-hmm. And we have an active program we're working on doing what we can to change that. And so we have classified staff here that, in my opinion, we're not paying a living wage. And that can't go on. We just have to figure out a way to fix it, and we're going to. Actually, we're in the process of doing that now. As it relates to DEI, the same issues that affect our faculty, the same issues that affect our students, also apply to classified staff. I look at us as one university family. Our anti-racism and inclusive excellence plans don't just straddle academic units. We actually have them for every single operating unit at the university, whether those units cater to students, whether they cater to faculty, or whether they cater to staff. And so if you should ask individuals in your leadership tree to actually show you the plan, because there is a plan for your unit. Isn't that right, Charnia?
It's a plan for your unit.
Like I said, remember I told you before, it's a piece of paper.
And you can hold us accountable.
But in that piece of paper represents policy.
And I would concur. I mean, at Nova, we talk about faculty, staff, and students. And so, in fact, just last week, our classified staff had their annual Achieving Classified Excellence, they named it. It's an annual workshop that's day-long, and in fact, they invited the system, we're part of the Virginia Community College system, they invited the system's chief diversity officer to talk with them about, the important role that they play. They're written into our plan, which is also a series of commitments. But I want to go back to something that Greg said, because we did a classified staff pay equity study. Second year I was here, we funded it and moved it forward. But through that, one of the things we really looked at hard is that we have no clear progression paths for many of our classified staff. So advisors are classified staff at Nova. And if you're an advisor on day one, if we come back in day 10, you're an advisor. We don't have advisor 1, advisor 2, advisor 3. We don't have senior advisors. So we're actually working on that right now, because to me, that's equity. Because you look across the aisle at faculty have that opportunity for progression within an institution. We owe it to our classified staff to provide them with those same pathways.
On behalf of my colleagues, I just want you to know that all of us presidents, we definitely understand and appreciate the work that our classified staff do on campus. I just wanted you to know that.
Thank you. All right.
So we've got some online questions again.
Okay.
One of our participants is asking from the perspective of a Mason student, but it can apply to all 3 of your schools. What is being done to empower students who have experienced unfair or harmful biases in the classroom, especially when that perpetrator is someone in a leadership position, such as a professor?
No, I can start there. You want to?
Sure. Well, I'll start. And just speaking broadly, I think most institutions have what we call a student ombuds. Right, so we have reporting mechanisms that include bias reporting pathways, but we also know that sometimes folks are a little suspicious about what happens with that. So we have a student ombuds who can work directly with students through that process and track the process all the way to the end. Also, provide sort of a neutral sounding board for those students. The one thing I would say, and I'm sure I speak for everyone up here, is that when we get those reports, we take them very, very seriously. I think sometimes students think that they send that into the void and nothing ever occurs. As with many other issues at any organization that involve personnel, you don't put them on a billboard and say, here's what happened to Ann, because that's illegal and it's not the way you do things. But I don't think anyone, if they ever did today, takes any concern that's raised with anything but deep seriousness, because we've seen consistently across the country that sometimes where there's one report, there are actually many challenges. So we look at all of those very, very seriously.
No, go ahead.
So, first and foremost, to whoever that student is and to other students who may be in the actual vicinity or listening to this, number one, we actually know bias exists. Mm-hmm. We know it's not always implicit. Sometimes that bias is explicit, right? We've seen it play itself out in our classrooms. We know it's there. And when we get access to addressing it and engaging to root it out, we have taken very, very firm, stern measures to do so. And so I want that student to know that we hear you and we recognize that this problem does indeed exist. Oftentimes students don't report.
Yeah.
And we need them to do that, right? They need to engage. They can go through Sharnia's office, and also engage in with the dean of the respective college or school in which they're in. But I would recommend that they touch both, so that there's actually a check and balance on the actual school or college to make sure that it is addressed. The reality is that it's real, and we have two mechanisms to help. One of them is to get it to stop by addressing the person who's perpetrating, but the second is helping the students address and cope. And let me tell you why that's important. You will not escape bias, explicit or implicit, at all in your life. Once you leave this campus, it will still be there. And so we need to equip people with tools to help them be able to address and deal with it as they exit our shores here. And so that's the other piece that we can give them, but we can't give it if we don't know it. So first report, and then engage.
I'd like to add, but it's mostly the same. We have a process at Virginia State that we hope our students would participate in. It can start at any level, but one easy way is you can send me an email to president@vsu.edu. That's another way to kind of start the process. And so we always hope that students report and that they're as honest as they can be about what occurred to them. But I'd like to offer this particular student two other things that I think would also be helpful. And again, it's not the student's responsibility to change the culture. That's our job. And so this is me asking for help, not saying it's a student's responsibility. But that help is one of the challenges that we really have is the one that President Kress laid out, is it's almost impossible to let people know that we're doing something. Mm-hmm. And so I'm engaged with my students trying to find clever ways to show action and effort, because it's so difficult to show in this scenario. And so engaging with the offices to try to, how do we do that without violating any laws, without people's confidentiality, is something we really need help from students. What would you like to see? That's number one. Second, we also know that it's a challenge whenever you have someone who's it's a challenging power relationship, that some students don't feel comfortable reporting right away. what I try to encourage folks to do, no one does it, but I try to encourage folks to do, is to write it up and save it. If you don't feel comfortable reporting now, write up the incident with as many details as possible and witnesses. And when you're out of the class, send it to me. If you have to wait 4 years until after you've graduated, send it. It's still very useful to get it. And so if there's a challenge with if the person's in leadership and I just don't feel comfortable report, one, I want you to feel comfortable. But heaven forbid if you don't. When you're out of that power dynamic, please send it because we still need it.
Yeah. And I want to add to that, at Mason, they can also report. We have a bias reporting through the Center for Culture, Equity, and Empowerment as well. And so, Sydney, I know you're representing our Hoover audience, so we'll allow you to do a couple more questions since we had 3 in-person questions already.
So another question from one of our participants is, where do you see social equity and health equity in the future, not just at Mason, but at all of your schools? In about 3 to 5 years, will it have a minimal, modest, or great effect on the future research, student learning and growth, and workplace development?
Social equity and health equity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the question really highlights the fact that when you're truly talking about anti-racism and inclusive excellence, you need to recognize the intersectionalities, right? That you're not just talking about racism, you're talking about often poverty. You're talking about a lack of access to services that many of us take for granted. You know, and I'm sure Mason and I'm sure VSU does the same thing. We have a dental hygiene program. Our students go into Title I schools, they go into Section 8 housing and provide initial cleanings and treatments for students and for families who have no access to dental care. Right, so many of the challenges that we see at our institutions come from folks who are outside of systems, looking in, trying to figure out where's the on-ramp for me. And I think until we are able to seriously, and I'll just take the health equity, which is attached to social equity, right? Until we're really able to address the health equity concerns, you know, the challenges that folks have with mental and behavioral health, with physical health, with processing the trauma of the last 2 years, right? The trauma that they experience every day. I think it's going to consistently then come to our institutions to try to find those pathways forward. And I'll just give an example of how folks think about our colleges sometimes. So until December of last year, so I want everyone to hear this, December of 21, Virginia's community colleges could not offer mental health services to the students. It was a policy. Why were commuter schools? Right? That's not what we did. We didn't have residences. We didn't. So only after the pandemic, and largely thank you for the higher education emergency relief funds, because every institution had those dollars that we could spend on telemental health services, we could finally offer telemental health services, and now the policy has been rewritten. That was December 2021. And the practice before that had been to refer our students to community services boards, which are fantastic, but are themselves overwhelmed with lack of access to mental health care. So, you know, I wish I could see in the next 5 years that there's going to be health equity. I don't know. I'm kind of old at this point, and I haven't seen it yet. But I do think, again, that goes back to funding and to the need for our institutions to really be able to address the whole student, not just the part of the student who's carrying a notebook or a Mac laptop or whatever, but the whole student in order for them to be successful.
Look, until we deal with the problem of equity, period, you're going to see it manifest itself in the healthcare system. You're going to see it manifest itself in social frameworks and networks. You're going to see it manifest itself in the economy, right? We have an equity problem in the country. And when we have an equity problem in the country, it will manifest itself everywhere because there is a fundamental equity issue. And so what we can do on our end is do the best that we can in terms of minimizing its effect in the individuals that we have under our care. That is our job and then to prepare them to deal with the inequities that they're going to have to deal with when they leave our campus. If we can get those two pieces right, we will then do our part in terms of helping individuals manage this issue better.
And not just deal with them, but end them,
That's right.
right?
That's
We
exactly right.
still look at healthcare in this country as a privilege, and there's no equity with privileges. So until we decide that we want to look at healthcare in a different way, then there's no way to really address equity.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question. So I think I'm going to pivot over to here. Thank you so much, Sydney, for those online questions.
Thank you for giving me that opportunity. I am an artist. I'm an art teacher at George Mason. And throughout the whole day, I've been listening about ARIE and inclusiveness and excellence, and I haven't heard anybody address the role of the arts in this. So I would like to ask all of you, what is your vision for the role of art to address these issues that we've been talking about? And what do you think are your hardship? Maybe it's easier to get funding for medical or engineering, but it's like for the arts really. And basically, like when we're talking about underprivileged societies and students and where they come from and all that, I mean, I see it almost every semester that there are students who really didn't have any clue in their high school about what drawing is, what painting is, what art history is. How do you address these issues, and how important, and this is a genuine question because you have addressed science and engineering and business and stuff like that. What do you think the role of the arts in your vision for the spirits that we're talking about? Thank you.
Well, it's the arts that help us understand many of the challenges that we are faced, right? Artists have a unique way of highlighting things in which they see and experience in their environment. And I'm not just talking about the visual arts, but also you can take that to the performing arts and the like, right? And so it's not just what you see, it's all of the senses. And we recognize that here at Mason. And so it's part of the solution, and we incorporate it as such. What we try to do is to look at our management and engagement with the arts in a similar way in which we would see the management and engagement of other units. And in fact, because we recognize that sometimes the arts doesn't get its fair share in society today, we overemphasize, right? And have that overemphasis because we know that it's a necessary a part of our existence and helps us to understand what it is to be uniquely human.
Well, I'm the one person who's not an engineer on the panel, right? So my first degree is in finance, but I wrote my master's thesis on Milton's Paradise Lost and studied early modern women's literature, which has a strong foothold in today's economy, and as a doctoral student. So I think, there's a line in the novel, Station 11, there's something that's written on the back of a caravan that actually comes from Star Trek, right? And it's because survival is not enough, right? The arts matter. And you'll often, when I'm tweeting, you'll often see me tweeting #ArtsMatter. The arts matter. And it's what makes a civilization, right? It's what helps us understand folks who are different from us and folks who are all too much like us. Right. And I think one of the great challenges, to your point, that we have, though, is helping funders understand that you can have all the engineers in the world, but if everyone only thinks like, thinks like an engineer, and you don't have that spark of creativity from somebody who thinks, to borrow your video, thinks different, then what you do is you replicate, you don't create. right? And we can't live in a world that replicates, because we can kind of all see in this room where replication will get us. It is creation of new. It is innovation. And that's where the arts are. They don't just hold a mirror up to who we are. The arts show us who we can be in a way that is inspirational beyond almost anything. And there's art in every aspect of life. And I do think honoring the art that our students bring to us is also important, and the visions that they bring from their own experiences that sometimes can show us worlds that we never imagined, wish we hadn't had to imagine, but worlds that we have to change.
I've actually got I've got a TED Talk that talks about STEM in the arts and how important creativity and innovation is for engineers and for solving all of our problems. I don't think it's an accident that my colleagues and myself, that when we start to quote things or talk about things that we think can really advance a message, we all refer to art. I mean, she just talked about Star Trek, and he's quoting rappers, right? No, but misquoting rappers. Thank you with the assist, Ann, right here.
It was easy.
It was Rakim, I'm telling you. But I think I know, and again, I'm not saying anything that Ann didn't say better than I'm trying to say it, is that art is going to be critical in terms of trying to move it forward, because it's what people connect to. And it's the reason why you have to use art to move social movements forward. You have to. There's no way to do it without it, because people connect to the art in a way that they don't connect to speeches and things like that. So yes, sir. All in.
All right. Well, I wish we had more time. I know we have other questions, but we are at time. I just want to thank our esteemed panelists. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your vision and just being so transparent with our audience. We have a small token of appreciation that I want to give each of you.
Each.
Yes,
Give it
each
give
of
me
you.
my own token.
That's right.
Small token of appreciation. Thank you so much, President Abdullah.
Give it a
President Kress.
Like I can take George Mason's swag back in my camp.
Yeah.
And President Washington. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, this is you. Hey, you know what? My phone is.
15-minute. Let me just.